The blue screen of death stared back at me for the third time this week, mocking my years of experience and making me feel like a complete fool in front of my entire department. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the frozen monitor, that familiar knot of dread forming in my stomach. At 58 years old, I'd survived countless office transformations, adapted to new software systems, and prided myself on keeping up with technology better than most people my age. But lately, my computer seemed to have developed a personal vendetta against me. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of our downtown office building, casting long shadows across my cluttered desk. Coffee cups from the past few days sat abandoned next to stacks of client files, and my usually organized workspace had devolved into chaos as I struggled to complete even the simplest tasks. Every email took twice as long to send, documents disappeared without explanation, and presentations crashed at the worst possible moments. Just yesterday, I'd stood in front of the entire marketing team, watching my carefully prepared quarterly report dissolve into digital gibberish, their patient smiles barely masking their growing concerns about my competence. This incredible story needs to be heard, so please like and subscribe if you want more. Where in the world are you watching? My name is Margaret Carter, and I'm 58 years old. I've worked at Davidson and Associates Marketing for over 15 years, climbing from junior account manager to senior project coordinator through dedication and skill. But in the past month, I'd begun to feel like a relic from a bygone era, watching younger colleagues exchange knowing glances when my computer inevitably malfunctioned during important meetings. The worst part wasn't the technical failures themselves, but the creeping self-doubt that followed me home each evening, whispering that maybe I really was too old for this job, maybe I really couldn't keep up anymore. That's when Derek Hoffman entered the picture. Derek was 34, sharp-dressed, and had joined our team 6 months ago, with impressive credentials and an even more impressive smile. He'd positioned himself as the office tech guru, always quick to offer help when someone struggled with software issues. "Don't worry, Margaret," he'd say with that condescending tone that made my skin crawl. "These systems can be tricky for people who didn't grow up with them." He'd swoop in to fix my problems with theatrical efficiency, fingers flying across my keyboard while making comments about outdated approaches and better ways to handle technology. The rest of the team seemed charmed by his expertise, and I found myself increasingly grateful for his assistance, even as his comments stung. At home, my husband Robert Carter had become my anchor in this storm of technological humiliation. Robert, 61 and recently retired from his engineering career, possessed the kind of methodical mind that had once designed aircraft components and now applied itself to understanding my daily struggles. He'd listen patiently each evening as I recounted another computer disaster, his weathered hands holding mine across our kitchen table while I fought back tears of frustration. "Something doesn't add up here, Maggie," he'd say, using the nickname he'd called me for 32 years of marriage. "You've never had problems like this before. Your computer skills are better than most people half your age." His unwavering faith in my abilities helped me sleep at night, but couldn't erase the growing anxiety that followed me to work each morning. My saving grace at the office was Linda Rodriguez, a fellow senior employee who'd become both colleague and trusted friend over the years. Linda worked in the accounting department 2 floors up, but we'd maintained a close friendship through coffee breaks, lunch conversations, and the shared experience of being older women in an increasingly youth-focused workplace. At 55, Linda had her own stories about adapting to new technologies and dealing with younger colleagues who sometimes treated experience like a liability. She'd been noticing my struggles and offering quiet support, always ready with an encouraging word or a shared eye roll when Derek made one of his patronizing comments about generational technology gaps. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I'd arrived early, hoping to catch up on emails before the office filled with activity. My computer booted up normally, and for a moment, I felt a surge of optimism. Maybe today would be different. Maybe whatever gremlins had been plaguing my system had finally moved on to torment someone else. I opened my email program, began typing a response to an important client inquiry, and watched in horror as the screen flickered and died. But this time, something was different. As I sat there staring at the black screen, a memory surfaced from the previous evening's conversation with Robert. He'd been asking detailed questions about my computer problems, approaching them with his engineer's mindset for systematic troubleshooting. "When exactly do these crashes happen?" he'd asked. "Is there a pattern to the timing? Who has access to your workstation?" At the time, his questions had seemed like loving support, but now they sparked a different kind of thinking. I found myself really examining the timing of my computer failures for the first time. They never happened when I was alone at my desk early in the morning or late in the evening. They always occurred during peak office hours, often when I was presenting to groups or working on high-visibility projects. And Derek was always conveniently nearby, ready to step in and save the day with his technical expertise. The realization hit me like ice water in my veins. Linda appeared at my cubicle entrance just as I was processing this disturbing possibility. "Another crash?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Something in my expression must have alarmed her because she immediately pulled up a chair, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Margaret, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't bring myself to voice my suspicions out loud, not yet. Instead, I found myself studying Derek's desk across the office floor, watching him type efficiently at his perfectly functioning computer. He glanced up and caught my eye, flashing that practiced smile and starting to rise from his chair, probably preparing to offer his usual helpful intervention. But what I discovered next changed everything. "Linda, could you just stay here for a minute?" I whispered, my heart pounding as Derek approached with that familiar expression of helpful concern. She nodded, settling back in her chair as Derek reached my cubicle. "Computer troubles again, Margaret?" he asked, his voice carrying just the right note of sympathetic frustration. "You know, at some point, we might want to consider whether this workstation is just cursed." I watched his face carefully as he spoke, searching for any telltale sign of deception. "It's strange," I said slowly, "how it always seems to happen at the worst possible moments." Derek chuckled, already reaching toward my computer tower. "That's technology for you." Murphy's Law in action. His fingers moved confidently toward the power button, and something about the practiced way he approached my machine made my stomach clench. "Actually," I said quickly, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice, "I'd like to try something different this time." Derek's hand froze midway to the computer. For just a split second, his helpful smile flickered. "Different how?" Linda leaned forward slightly, and I could feel her attention sharpening. The three of us formed an odd tableau around my dead computer, the tension suddenly palpable in a way that had nothing to do with technical difficulties. "I want to understand what's actually happening," I continued, my voice growing steadier as I spoke. "Every time this crashes, you fix it so quickly that I never learn what went wrong. Maybe it's time I figured out the pattern myself." Something shifted in Derek's expression, a subtle tightening around his eyes. "Margaret, you know I'm always happy to help. Why struggle through technical troubleshooting when I can have you back up and running in minutes?" "Because," I said, the words coming from a place of growing certainty, "I'm starting to think these aren't random computer failures." The silence that followed felt electric. Linda's sharp intake of breath was barely audible, But Derek heard it too. His helpful demeanor began to crack around the edges, revealing something harder underneath. "That's quite an accusation," he said quietly. "I haven't accused anyone of anything," I replied, though my heart was racing. "I'm just saying I want to understand my own computer problems." Derek straightened up, his hand falling away from my machine entirely. "Fine. But when you're still sitting here frustrated an hour from now, don't expect me to drop everything to bail you out." As he walked away, his usual confident stride had a different quality to it. Linda waited until he was well out of earshot before leaning close to me. "Margaret," she whispered urgently, "what aren't you telling me? That whole interaction felt like you were speaking in code." I stared at my blank screen, Robert's systematic questions echoing in my mind. The timing, the patterns, the convenient solutions. Derek's reaction just now when I suggested investigating the problems myself. The way his smile had faltered when I refused his immediate help. "Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer." I turned to face her fully. "In all the time you've worked here, have you ever seen Derek's computer crash? Even once?" She considered this carefully, her expression growing more troubled by the second. "No," she said finally. "No, I haven't. And Margaret, now that you mention it, I've never seen anyone else in this office have the kind of persistent problems you've been dealing with. Occasional glitches, sure, but nothing like what you've been going through." My hands were trembling slightly as the full implications settled over me. If I was right about this, it meant months of humiliation, lost opportunities, and damaged confidence had been deliberately orchestrated. The thought was almost too enormous to process. "What are you thinking?" Linda asked gently. Before I could answer, my computer suddenly hummed back to life. The screen flickered on, displaying my desktop exactly as I'd left it before the crash. Both Linda and I stared at it in shock. "I didn't touch anything," I whispered. Linda's face had gone pale. Neither did I. We both turned to look across the office floor. Derek was at his desk, but he wasn't looking at his own screen. He was watching us, and when our eyes met his, he quickly looked away. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that my worst suspicions were true. But knowing and proving were two entirely different things, and I had no idea how to bridge that gap without destroying what remained of my professional reputation. What I needed was evidence, but getting it would require me to do something I'd never attempted before. Outmaneuver someone who had been playing this game far longer than I'd even realized it existed. The afternoon light filtering through the office windows cast long shadows across my desk as I tried to focus on the quarterly reports, but my mind kept circling back to that moment when my computer had mysteriously revived itself. Every few minutes, I'd glance toward Derek's workstation, studying his movements, looking for patterns I'd been too trusting to notice before. Linda had returned to her own tasks, but I could feel her stealing worried glances at me. The weight of our conversation hung between us like a shared secret neither of us quite knew how to handle. The office felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of suspicion that made every normal sound seem significant. At 3:47, my screen flickered again. Just once, barely perceptible, but enough to make my stomach drop. I immediately looked toward Derek, who was typing steadily at his keyboard, his expression neutral and professional. Too neutral, perhaps. In all my months of computer troubles, I'd never paid attention to what he was doing during my crashes. Now, I couldn't stop watching. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "How did the rest of your day go? Any more issues?" I stared at the message, my brother's genuine concern evident even through the clinical brevity of his words. Robert dealt in facts and logic, systems and solutions. If I was going to prove what I suspected, I'd need his methodical approach. "Can we talk tonight? In person?" "I think I need help with something more complex than I initially thought." His response came quickly. "Of course. My place at 7?" The rest of the afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every time Derek stood up from his desk, every time he walked past my workstation, every casual greeting felt loaded with hidden meaning. When he stopped by Linda's desk to discuss a client file, I found myself straining to overhear their conversation, searching for any hint that their exchange was about more than work. Linda caught my eye as Derek walked away and gave me a barely perceptible nod. She'd been watching too. By 5:30, the office had mostly emptied out. Derek was still at his desk, seemingly absorbed in his work, but I noticed he hadn't made any move to leave, despite usually being one of the first out the door. Linda was packing up her things with deliberate slowness, and I realized she was waiting to leave at the same time I did. "Ready to head out?" she asked, approaching my desk with her purse slung over her shoulder. "Almost." I saved my work and began shutting down my computer, hyper-aware of Derek's presence across the room. "Just need to finish up here." As my computer went through its shutdown sequence, I held my breath, half expecting another crash that would require Derek's expert assistance, but it powered down normally, leaving me with a mixture of relief and disappointment. I'd almost wanted something to happen, some concrete evidence I could point to. Linda and I walked to the elevator together, the silence between us heavy with unspoken thoughts. It wasn't until we were safely enclosed in the elevator car that she spoke. "Margaret, I've been thinking about what we discussed earlier, about Derek's computer never crashing." She pressed the button for the parking garage with more force than necessary. "I did some mental inventory of the past few months, and I realized something else. Have you noticed that your problems always seem to happen when you're working on something important? The Morrison presentation? The quarterly analysis? That new client proposal?" The elevator descended with a soft mechanical hum, and I felt my stomach drop along with it. She was right. My crashes hadn't been random at all. They'd been strategically timed to cause maximum disruption and embarrassment. "That's what I'm going to talk to Robert about tonight," I said quietly. "If what we're thinking is true, I need to figure out how to prove it without looking paranoid or vindictive." The elevator doors opened onto the dim parking garage, our footsteps echoing off the concrete walls as we walked toward our cars. Linda stopped beside her sedan and turned to face me. "Be careful, Margaret. If Derek is doing what we think he's doing, he's been planning this for a long time. He's not going to make it easy to catch him." I nodded, fumbling with my keys as the weight of the situation settled over me. "I know. But I can't keep living like this, wondering if every presentation is going to be sabotaged, if every important deadline is going to be derailed by convenient technical failures." Linda's expression was troubled in the fluorescent lighting. "What are you going to do?" "I honestly don't know yet. But Robert will help me figure out a plan. He's good at thinking through complex problems systematically." As I drove across town to Robert's apartment, my mind raced through months of incidents with new understanding. The pattern was so clear now that I wondered how I'd missed it for so long. Every crash had served Derek's purposes perfectly, positioning him as the office hero while undermining my competence and confidence. Robert's building was a converted warehouse in the Arts District, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures. I climbed the stairs to his third-floor unit, my footsteps echoing in the stairwell, and knocked on his familiar blue door. He opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting right beside the entrance. His hair was disheveled, and he was wearing his old MIT sweatshirt, which usually meant he'd been deep in thought about something technical. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let me pass. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, and I have some ideas about how we can approach this systematically." His apartment was exactly as I'd expected it to be. Clean, organized, with a powerful computer setup dominating one corner of the living room. Technical manuals were stacked neatly on his coffee table, and a whiteboard covered with diagrams and notes stood near the window. "Robert, before we get into solutions, I need to tell you what happened after we talked." I settled into his familiar leather chair and recounted the afternoon's events. Derek's reaction to my suggestion about investigating the problems myself, the mysterious computer revival, Linda's observations about the timing of my crashes. Robert listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Margaret," he said finally, "what you're describing sounds like deliberate, systematic sabotage. If you're right about this, it's not just a technical problem, it's workplace harassment." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with legal and professional implications I hadn't fully considered. "But how do I prove it?" I asked. "I can't just accuse a coworker of sabotage based on suspicions and timing coincidences. I need evidence." Robert stood up and walked to his whiteboard, picking up a marker. "Then we're going to get you evidence. But first, we need to understand exactly how he's doing this." He began drawing a network diagram, his movements quick and precise. "There are several ways someone could remotely interfere with your computer. Most of them would leave digital fingerprints if we know where to look." As he sketched out possibilities, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. We were moving from suspicion to action, but I had no idea what we might uncover or what the consequences might be. "The question is," Robert said, turning back to me with the marker still in his hand, "are you prepared for what we might find? Because once we start digging into this, there's no going back to pretending everything is normal." I looked at the diagram on his whiteboard, at the careful analysis of the ways my trust could have been violated, and realized I'd already passed the point of no return hours ago in Linda's cubicle. "I'm ready," I said, though my voice shook slightly. "But Robert, what if we're wrong? What if I'm just being paranoid and there's an innocent explanation for all of this?" He set down the marker and looked at me with the same serious expression he'd worn as a child when he was about to tell me something difficult but necessary. "Then we'll find that out too," he said. "But Margaret, based on everything you've told me, I don't think we're wrong. And tomorrow, we're going to prove it." The next morning, I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen, hyper-aware of every sound in the office. The familiar hum of the air conditioning seemed amplified, and I found myself jumping at the soft ping of incoming emails. Robert's plan echoed in my mind from our late-night conversation. We would install monitoring software that would track any remote access attempts or unusual system activity. "You're going to need to act completely normal," he had warned me as I left his apartment. "If Derek suspects you're onto him, he might change his methods or stop altogether. Then we'd never get proof." Acting normal felt impossible. When Derek walked past my cubicle at 9:15, offering his usual cheerful, "Good morning, Margaret," I had to force myself to smile back naturally. His friendly demeanor felt sinister now, like a mask hiding something calculating underneath. "Morning," I managed, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. He paused by my desk, and I felt my heart rate spike. "Everything running smoothly today?" he asked, gesturing toward my computer with what appeared to be genuine concern. So far, so good, I replied, hoping he couldn't hear the tension in my voice. After he moved on, I realized my hands were shaking slightly. This was going to be harder than I thought. At lunch, I called Linda from my cell phone in the parking lot. The autumn air was crisp, and I pulled my jacket tighter as I waited for her to answer. I can barely concentrate, I told her when she picked up. Every time Derek comes near my desk, I feel like he's going to figure out that I suspect something. You're overthinking this, Linda said, though her voice carried its own note of anxiety. I've been watching him this morning, and he's acting completely normal. Maybe that's good news for your brother's plan. Or maybe he's just that good at hiding what he's doing, I said, watching a few leaves spiral down from the oak tree I was standing under. Margaret, listen to me. You've got to get through today without tipping him off. Can you do that? I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs. I think so. Robert is coming by after work to install the monitoring software. Then we'll know for sure. And if it turns out you're right about all this? That was the question I'd been avoiding all morning. I honestly don't know, Linda. I keep thinking about what Robert said yesterday about workplace harassment. This could get really complicated really fast. When I returned to my desk, I found Derek standing near my computer, holding a small device that looked like a USB drive. Oh, there you are, he said with that same friendly smile. I was just dropping off this software update that IT wanted everyone to install. Should help with some of the performance issues people have been having. My blood went cold. He was standing right next to my computer, holding what could be another tool for sabotaging my system, and I was supposed to act like everything was normal. That's thoughtful of you to bring it around personally, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Just trying to help, he replied, setting the device on my desk. You should probably install it when you get a chance. It says it's pretty important. After he walked away, I stared at the USB drive like it was a snake coiled on my desk. Every instinct told me not to put that thing anywhere near my computer. But I also realized this might be exactly the kind of evidence Robert and I needed. I picked up my phone and sent Robert a quick text. He just gave me a USB drive to install. Says it's from IT. What should I do? His response came back within minutes. Don't install it. Bring it home with you tonight. This might be exactly what we need. The rest of the afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. I found myself second-guessing every interaction, analyzing every casual comment from Derek for hidden meaning. When he stopped by my desk again around 3 o'clock to ask if I'd had a chance to install the update, I had to grip my hands together under my desk to keep them from shaking. Not yet, I told him. I wanted to finish this report first. Of course, he said. Just don't forget about it. It can get pretty insistent about these security updates. As closing time approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread building in my chest. Tonight, Robert and I would either confirm my suspicions or discover I'd been imagining a conspiracy that didn't exist. Either way, by tomorrow morning, I'd know the truth about what had been happening to my computer. The USB drive felt heavier than it should have as I slipped it into my purse. Whatever was on that small device might hold the answers to weeks of frustration and self-doubt. But as I walked toward the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something much more serious than simple computer sabotage. Robert's house smelled like coffee and electronics when I arrived at 7. He met me at the door with an expression I'd never seen before. Part excitement, part concern, like a kid who'd discovered something both fascinating and potentially dangerous. You brought it? He asked before I'd even stepped inside. I patted my purse. Right here. But Robert, I've been thinking about this all afternoon. What if we're wrong? What if this really is just some routine IT update and I'm being paranoid? Then we'll know that too, he said, leading me toward his home office. But either way, we'll have answers. His office looked like something out of a cybersecurity movie. Multiple monitors, cables snaking everywhere, and equipment I couldn't begin to identify. He'd clearly been preparing for this. Before we do anything, Robert said, settling into his chair, I need to tell you what I found when I looked deeper into your computer remotely today. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, looked deeper? I ran some diagnostic tools while you were at work, traced through your system logs more thoroughly. He pulled up a screen full of data that meant nothing to me. Someone's been accessing your computer regularly, not just installing things, actively monitoring your activity, tracking what applications you use, even logging your keystrokes. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Keystrokes? You mean like passwords? Potentially, yes. But here's what's really interesting. The access pattern matches your office hours almost perfectly. Whoever's doing this is doing it while you're both at work, probably from a computer on the same network. I sank into the chair next to him. So it really is Derek. The evidence certainly points that way, but this USB drive might give us definitive proof. Robert held out his hand. May I? I pulled the small device from my purse, my fingers trembling slightly as I handed it over. Such a tiny thing to cause so much trouble. Robert inserted it into an isolated computer he'd set up specifically for this analysis. This machine isn't connected to any network, he explained. Whatever's on here can't escape or communicate with anything else. We watched as files appeared on his screen. Robert's eyebrows rose higher with each folder he opened. This is definitely not an IT update, he said quietly. What is it? It's a sophisticated remote access toolkit. Once installed, it would give someone complete control over your computer. They could access your files, use your camera and microphone, even manipulate your screen to make it look like programs are crashing when they're not. The full scope of what Derek had been doing hit me like a physical blow. He's been watching me through my camera? It's possible. This software has those capabilities. Robert's voice was gentle but serious. There's something else, though. This isn't amateur hour stuff. This is professional-grade surveillance software, the kind that costs serious money. What are you saying? Robert leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. I'm saying Derek either has access to some very expensive tools or someone's paying him to do this. Corporate espionage-level equipment doesn't just fall into someone's lap. My phone buzzed with a text message, making both of us jump. I glanced at the screen and felt my blood turn cold. It's from Derek, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What does it say? I read the message aloud, my hands shaking. Hey, just wanted to check if you got that software installed okay. Having any trouble with it? Happy to come over and help if you need it. Robert and I stared at each other. The implications hung heavy in the air between us. He's checking to see if his spyware is active, Robert said finally. And if you don't respond soon, he's going to know something's wrong. What do I tell him? We need to be very careful here. If he realizes we're onto him, he might destroy evidence or escalate whatever he's really doing. Robert's fingers drummed against his desk. But first, I think we need to call Sarah. Sarah? Why? Because if Derek is using professional-grade surveillance equipment and monitoring your every move at work, this isn't just about making you look bad with computer problems anymore. This could be industrial espionage, identity theft, or worse. And Sarah works in legal compliance. She'll know what our options are and what kind of evidence we need to gather. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Derek. Everything okay? You're usually pretty quick to respond to messages. The casual tone made my skin crawl. How long had he been monitoring my response patterns? How much of my life had he been watching? "Call Sarah now," I told Robert, "and then help me figure out what to text him back, because he's definitely getting suspicious." Robert was already pulling out his phone when I held up my hand. "Wait," I said, my mind racing. "Sarah works in legal compliance, but she's also Derek's supervisor. If we tell her what we found, she'll have to act on it immediately. Derek will know something's up." "So, what are you suggesting?" I stared at Derek's messages, feeling trapped between terrible options. "I need to buy us time to figure out what he's really after. If this is bigger than just making me look incompetent, we need more evidence before we expose him." Robert frowned. "That's dangerous. You'd be walking back into his surveillance web." "I'm already in it," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "The question is whether I use that to our advantage or just run scared." My phone buzzed a third time. Derek again. "Starting to worry about you. Should I swing by your desk?" The casual concern in his message felt like ice water in my veins. How many times had he done this exact thing? Reached out with fake worry while secretly monitoring my every keystroke, my every movement? "I have to respond," I said. "He's going to come looking for me if I don't." Robert nodded grimly. "What are you going to tell him?" I thought about Derek's patterns, his methods. He was methodical, patient. He'd been building his case against me slowly, making me look increasingly incompetent over months. Someone that calculating wouldn't just be doing this for fun. "Sorry, was in a meeting," I typed back. "Software working great so far. Thanks again for the help." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. "Good," Robert said, watching over my shoulder. "Casual but appreciative. That should buy us some time." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. What if Derek could see that I was in Robert's office right now? What if he knew I wasn't in any meeting? The paranoia was already starting to eat at me, and I'd only known about the surveillance for 20 minutes. "Robert, I need you to understand something," I said, turning to face him fully. "If Derek has been watching me through my computer camera, he knows things about my work habits, my schedule, maybe even personal conversations I've had at my desk. This isn't just about computer sabotage anymore." The weight of that realization settled between us. Robert's expression grew more serious as he processed what I was saying. "You're right. We need Sarah involved, but we need to be smart about it." He paused, thinking. "What if we approach this differently? Instead of going to her as Derek's supervisor, what if we go to her as someone who understands corporate security and legal implications?" "You mean tell her we discovered a potential security breach without immediately naming Derek?" "Exactly. Let her help us understand what we're dealing with legally before we accuse anyone of anything." It felt like a reasonable compromise, but something nagged at me. Sarah had always been fair, but she was also thorough. She wouldn't just accept a vague report about security issues. She'd want specifics, and those specifics would lead straight back to Derek. My phone stayed mercifully silent, which I hoped meant Derek was satisfied with my response. But I couldn't shake the feeling that every moment we delayed was another moment for him to cover his tracks or escalate whatever his real agenda was. "There's something else we need to consider," I said slowly. "What if Derek isn't working alone?" Robert's face went pale at my suggestion. The fluorescent lights in his office suddenly felt too bright, casting harsh shadows across the cluttered desk between us. Outside his window, I could see the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, creating patterns on the carpet that seemed to shift and move like my own unstable thoughts. Not working alone. he repeated quietly, as if testing the words. You mean someone else in the office? The possibility hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I found myself mentally reviewing every interaction I'd had over the past few months, every helpful suggestion, every sympathetic look when my computer malfunctioned. The conference room where I'd presented last month suddenly felt different in my memory. Had those understanding nods been genuine, or had someone else been watching me stumble through technical difficulties they'd helped orchestrate? Think about it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper despite Robert's closed door. Derek's good with computers, but he's not invisible. Someone would have noticed him accessing my machine, installing software, whatever he's been doing, unless he had help. Or cover. Robert leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. His usually neat desk seemed to reflect the chaos of our discovery, papers scattered, his coffee mug forgotten and growing cold. Sarah, he said after a long moment. My stomach dropped. What about Sarah? No, I don't mean she's involved. Robert held up his hands quickly, seeing my expression. I mean, we need to think about this from her perspective. If there's a conspiracy, if multiple people are involved, she's going to want evidence. Real evidence. Not just suspicions and theories. The rational part of my brain knew he was right, but the paranoid part that had been growing stronger by the minute wondered if we could even trust Sarah completely. She was Derek's supervisor, yes, but she was also part of management. What if there were pressures I didn't understand? Office politics that made sacrificing one employee to protect another the smart business move? My phone buzzed again, and both Robert and I froze. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the enclosed space, like an alarm cutting through our whispered conspiracy. I looked down at the screen with trembling fingers. Derek again. Hey, just wanted to check. Are you back at your desk? I noticed some unusual network activity and wanted to make sure everything's still running smoothly. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Network activity. He was monitoring me right now, in real time, and he knew I wasn't at my computer. The casual tone of his message felt sinister now, like a cat toying with a mouse before the final pounce. Robert, I said, showing him the phone. He knows I'm not at my desk. Robert read the message, his jaw tightening with each word. The comfortable familiarity of his office, with its family photos and motivational posters, suddenly felt like a trap. Were we safe here? Could Derek see into Robert's office somehow? I found myself glancing at Robert's computer screen, wondering if those same monitoring programs were running on every machine in the building. We need to get you back to your desk, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. Act normal. Normal? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't even remember what normal feels like anymore. How long has he been watching me, Robert? How many private phone calls has he overheard? How many times have I changed clothes or fixed my makeup at my desk thinking I had privacy? The violation felt deeper with each passing moment. I thought about all the times I'd worked late, alone in the office, Derek's computer still glowing across the floor. Had he been watching me then too? The idea made my skin crawl. We document everything, Robert said, trying to regain control of the situation. We screenshot his messages. We write down timelines. We gather evidence before we accuse anyone. And in the meantime, he keeps watching me. Keeps sabotaging me. I stood up abruptly, pacing to his window. The parking lot below looked normal, peaceful even. Cars in neat rows, people walking to and from the building like any other Tuesday afternoon. It was surreal how ordinary everything appeared when my world had just tilted on its axis. My phone buzzed a third time. Derek, just want to make sure you're okay. You've been away from your desk for a while now. This time, there was no mistaking the undertone. It wasn't concern. It was a threat wrapped in false care, a reminder that he was watching, that he knew exactly where I was and what I was doing. He's escalating, I said, showing Robert the latest message. This isn't just about making me look incompetent anymore. This feels personal. Robert stood up too, moving to stand beside me at the window. For a moment, we both stared out at the ordinary afternoon scene below, as if the answer to our problem might be written in the arrangement of parked cars. What if, Robert said slowly, Derek isn't trying to get you fired? What if he wants something else entirely? The question hit me like a physical blow. All this time, I'd been assuming Derek's goal was to make me look bad, to damage my reputation, or eliminate competition. But what if the surveillance, the sabotage, the careful monitoring of my every move was building towards something else? Something much worse than losing my job. The silence stretched between Robert and me as his words sank in. What if Derek didn't want me fired? What if this wasn't about professional competition at all? My hands started shaking as I thought about all the times Derek had lingered by my desk, asking personal questions about my schedule, my weekend plans, whether I lived alone. I'd dismissed it as awkward small talk, but now every interaction took on a sinister cast. I need to call Sarah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to warn her. Wait, Robert said, gently taking my phone before I could dial. Think about this logically. If Derek is monitoring your communications, calling Sarah might put her in danger too. We don't know how deep this surveillance goes. The thought hit me like ice water. Sarah lived alone in her apartment across town. What if Derek had been gathering information about my sister too? What if he knew her address, her routine, her vulnerability? Then what do we do? I asked, feeling trapped. I can't just sit here knowing he's watching me, knowing he might be planning something. Robert moved back to his computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. We're going to turn the tables. If Derek thinks he's the only one who can play surveillance games, he's about to learn otherwise. What do you mean? I'm going to install some monitoring software of my own, Robert said, his voice taking on a determined edge. Completely legitimate IT security protocols. If Derek is using company resources to spy on employees, I have every right to investigate that as a security breach. I watched as Robert's fingers flew across his keyboard, opening programs I'd never seen before, the screen filled with technical readouts and network diagnostics. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we might actually have some power in this situation. There, Robert said after several tense minutes. I've just locked down Derek's access to certain monitoring tools. He'll still think everything is working normally, but I'll be able to see exactly what he's trying to access and when. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text message. Derek was calling. Robert and I stared at the phone as it rang, Derek's name flashing on the screen. The sound felt unnaturally loud in Robert's quiet office, each ring stretching longer than the last. Don't answer it, Robert whispered, though I hadn't made any move toward the phone. The ringing stopped, then immediately started again. Derek was calling back. He knows, I said, my mouth dry. He knows we're onto him. Maybe he saw that you cut off his access, or maybe he's been watching us this whole time. Robert, what if he's been listening to everything we just said? Robert's face went pale as he looked around his office with new eyes, scanning for anything that might be transmitting our conversation. His gaze lingered on his computer, his desk phone, even the small potted plant by his window. The phone stopped ringing, then buzzed with a text message. Derek. We need to talk, now. We're leaving, Robert said, standing up abruptly. Right now. We're going to your house to get Sarah, and then we're going somewhere Derek doesn't know about. Somewhere we can think clearly and figure out our next move. But what about work? What about acting normal? You said we needed to document everything and be careful. That was before he started calling you repeatedly and demanding meetings. This isn't normal workplace harassment anymore. Robert was already grabbing his keys, his usual calm demeanor replaced by urgent concern. This is stalking behavior, and it's escalating fast. We moved toward his office door, but before Robert could open it, we heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside Robert's door. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the small office. Robert? Derek's voice came through the door, artificially cheerful, but with an edge that made my blood run cold. I know you're in there, and I know she's with you. We really do need to talk. Robert and I froze, staring at each other as Derek's voice echoed through the door. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure Derek could hear it from the hallway. I know this might seem a little awkward, Derek continued, his tone still maintaining that fake friendliness that made my skin crawl. But there's been a misunderstanding about some technical issues, and I think we can clear everything up if we just sit down and talk it through. Robert motioned for me to stay quiet and pointed toward his office window. For a wild moment, I thought he was suggesting we climb out, but then I realized he was checking if there was another exit. There wasn't. We were on the 3rd floor, and the only way out was through that door where Derek was waiting. Robert, I can hear you moving around in there, Derek said, and now his voice had lost some of its artificial warmth. Look, I'm not going anywhere until we resolve this. I've got all day. My phone buzzed with another text, then another. Derek was texting me while standing right outside the door where we were hiding. The absurdity of it might have been funny under different circumstances, but right now, it felt deeply unsettling. Robert walked quietly to his desk and pulled out a piece of paper, writing quickly. Is there anywhere else we can go? Your mom's house? I shook my head and whispered as quietly as I could. She's at work until 6. The truth was, I felt terrible about how I'd been handling this whole situation with Mom. She'd been trying to help, offering practical advice and emotional support, but I'd been so focused on trying to handle everything myself that I hadn't really let her in. Now, trapped in Robert's office with Derek lurking outside, I realized how much I needed the people who cared about me. Robert? Derek knocked again, harder this time. I know this is about the computer issues. I've been trying to help with the technical problems, and I think there might be some confusion about my methods, but I'm really good at this stuff. I can fix everything. Robert's jaw tightened. He grabbed another piece of paper and wrote, He's admitting it. He knows we know. The casual way Derek was talking about helping with technical problems while simultaneously making it clear he wasn't leaving until he got what he wanted was chilling. It was like he'd created his own reality where tormenting me for weeks was actually a favor he'd been doing. My phone rang again. Derek calling while standing right outside the door. This time, Robert gestured for me to answer it. I stared at him in disbelief, but he nodded encouragingly and pointed to his computer, where he'd apparently set up some kind of recording program. With trembling fingers, I swiped to answer. Hello, Derek. Oh, good, you're there. Listen, I'm right outside Robert's office. Why don't you just open the door so we can talk face to face? I promise this will all make sense once I explain what's been happening with your computer. Actually, Derek, I don't think that's necessary, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. If you want to discuss work-related technical issues, we should probably schedule a meeting through proper channels. There was a pause. When Derek spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was any pretense of friendliness. I've been doing you a favor, he said coldly. You have no idea how incompetent you actually are with technology. I've been trying to teach you, to make you better at your job. But if you want to make this difficult, we can make it difficult. Robert was furiously typing on his computer, documenting everything. I could see him taking screenshots of the call log, the text messages, everything we'd discovered about Derek's unauthorized access to my computer. Derek, I said, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me. I need you to stop contacting me outside of normal work channels. If there are legitimate technical issues that need to be addressed, please submit them through the proper IT procedures. You don't get to tell me what to do, Derek snapped. You need my help whether you realize it or not, and I'm not going anywhere until you understand that. The line went dead, but Derek didn't walk away from the door. We could still hear him out there, occasionally shifting his weight or clearing his throat. He was settling in to wait us out. Robert showed me his computer screen. He'd managed to capture not just our conversation, but somehow he'd also documented Derek's continued attempts to access my computer remotely, even while standing in the hallway making demands. I thought about Mom, probably wondering how my day was going, having no idea that her advice about documentation and staying calm was exactly what was saving me right now. I thought about Derek's pattern of behavior, how it had escalated from subtle sabotage to outright confrontation. And then I realized something that made my blood run cold. Derek wasn't just trying to make me look incompetent at work. He'd been learning my patterns, my routines, my responses to stress. He knew when I arrived, when I left, who I talked to, what I worked on. He knew where I lived. The realization hit me like ice water in my veins. Derek wasn't just sabotaging my work computer. He had been systematically learning everything about me. My schedule, my habits, my vulnerabilities. And now, he was standing outside Robert's office, refusing to leave, escalating his behavior in real time. I looked at Robert, who seemed to read the panic in my eyes. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "He knows where I live," I whispered. "He's been tracking my patterns for months. This isn't just about work anymore." Robert's expression darkened. "We need to call building security right now." He reached for his desk phone. As if Derek could sense what we were planning, his voice came through the door again. "I can hear you whispering in there. You're making this so much more complicated than it needs to be. I'm trying to help you, and you're treating me like some kind of criminal." My phone buzzed with another text. This time, it wasn't from Derek. It was from Mom. "How did the meeting go with your boss? Thinking about you today?" Something about her message steadied me. Here was Derek, trying to control and manipulate me, and there was Mom, simply checking in because she cared. The contrast was so stark, it almost made me laugh. "Robert," I said, surprised by how calm I felt. "Before we call security, can you help me send all this documentation to my personal email? I want to make sure I have copies of everything." He nodded and quickly forwarded all the screenshots, logs, and evidence we'd gathered. As we worked, Derek continued his monologue through the door, his voice alternating between fake concern and barely contained anger. "You know, I've been wondering something," I said to Robert as we finished backing up the files. Derek always seemed to know exactly when I'd be struggling with my computer, almost like he was watching. Robert's eyes widened. The remote access logs show he was connecting to your machine multiple times throughout each day. He could see your screen, your keystrokes, everything you were working on. The scope of the violation was staggering. For months, Derek had been watching me work, deliberately causing problems, then swooping in to solve them. He'd been building a narrative where I was helpless and he was indispensable. "I need to call Mom," I said suddenly. "She should know what's happening in case Derek tries to contact me at home." Robert nodded and handed me his desk phone. I dialed Mom's number, my hands steadier than they'd been all morning. "Hi, sweetie," Mom answered on the second ring. "How did everything go with Robert?" "Mom, listen carefully. You remember how I told you about my computer problems at work? Well, it turns out a coworker named Derek has been sabotaging my computer remotely. Robert and I found proof, and now Derek is outside Robert's office refusing to leave. I wanted you to know in case he tries to contact me at home." There was a brief pause, then Mom's voice came back strong and clear. "Do you need me to come get you? And have you called security?" "Robert's about to call security, but I feel better knowing you're aware of what's happening. Derek has been learning my routines, Mom. He knows way too much about my schedule and habits." "Then you're not going home alone tonight?" Mom said firmly. "Call me when you're ready to leave work, and I'll meet you there. We'll figure out the next steps together." After hanging up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Derek's voice was still coming through the door, but it seemed smaller now, less threatening. He was just a person who had made increasingly poor choices, not the technological mastermind he'd tried to appear to be. "Ready to call security?" Robert asked. I nodded. "Actually, I think Derek just taught me the most valuable lesson about workplace technology that I'll ever learn." "What's that?" "That the biggest security threat isn't always a virus or a software glitch. Sometimes it's the person sitting right next to you, pretending to be helpful while they're actually undermining everything you're trying to accomplish." Robert smiled grimly and reached for the phone to call security. As he dialed, I realized that Derek had failed completely in his goal. Instead of making me feel incompetent with technology, he'd forced me to become more observant, more systematic in documenting problems, and more confident in trusting my instincts when something felt wrong. The irony was perfect. In trying to sabotage me, Derek had actually made me stronger.